around the northwest, and let us now go out around the northwest and into nature with our nature guide Angus Kennedy of Nature Northwest. Angus, very good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon, John. How are you doing?
Very good. Now, already we've got some questions in, and if you've got a question for Angus, feel free to get in touch, and I'm sure he'll do his best. But a lot of people asking about birds, having problems with birds. For instance, I'm a lady living on my own. My windows and doors are all fresh bird droppings every morning and all day long, and I'm not able to clean it up any longer. Do you have any ideas? Well, we had the same problem with the starlings, as I've mentioned, and they upped and left last week, so we were able to do a clean-up. This lady isn't able to do that clean-up, and she's just wondering if there's anything that she can do.
Yeah, well, they won't last very long, as you say. They'll be gone quite soon. A lot of birds have already, a lot of chicks have already fledged, have already left the nest. The likes of the house martins now, which build the little mud nests up in the gables, they will go on to have a second brood, and occasionally even a third brood. And oftentimes people lay down a little bit of cardboard or tape some paper onto their windowsills, something that can be removed quite easily. Some people will get somebody in to put a little shelf, a temporary shelf underneath the nest to catch the droppings, which kind of gets rid of the mess there. Right. And that's about the only things you can do with that.
We're blessed because not only do we have them in the eaves, but we also have them in the shed now. So there's droppings now all over the shed. So we've got I think 2 different nests, I think, in the shed. So it's just quite the year for birds.
You're a lucky man, John. Yeah. I have 2 swallows nests in my shed, and I have an old sheet that I use as a kind of a paint cover, which covers up the area just underneath their nests. They won't make much of a mess anywhere else, but if you can just locate where those nests are, just underneath, throw something over, something that's disposable. Right. And that'll sort that out, because they can be quite messy. In fact, they're quite hygienic, really, because when you think about what they're doing, those little chicks, from the minute they're born, Mum and Dad are taking away what they call the fecal sacs, which is their droppings, basically. And the droppings come in a little bag, like a little transparent kind of stretchy bag, with a little bit of cling film. And they take that away and distribute it elsewhere. And then once the chicks are big enough to move around the nest themselves after a week or so, they'll position themselves rear first at the edge of the nest and do their droppings outside, which is a mess for us. But when you think of what they're doing, they're keeping their own little house clean and hygienic, which is amazing, really. And that's just something they instinctively do. They know to do themselves.
Absolutely, keeping the place clean. Someone says I have birds nesting under the slates on the eave of my house, and there's little chicks, so I don't think I can remove them yet, but when is it a safe time to do so? In other words, when would be a safe time to remove the nest?
Well, they'll go themselves probably in the next week or 2. If you can hear the chicks cheeping, that means they're getting quite big. So it's really only another few days till they fledge, and then you will have the great pleasure, if it's the little sparrows, that usually the only things nesting onto the eaves like that are sparrows or starlings. Starlings are quite big, and the sparrows are small little things, like a little finch, kind of the size of a robin, but very brown, and the male has a little grey head on it. Little grey cap on it, but you'll see them pecking away around the gravel or around the house for all sorts of bugs. And one thing which I quite like, actually, they do a nice window cleaning service. I often get distracted at my own office here with the sparrows because they'll flutter and pick away at the spiders. If I haven't tidied up the spiders' webs from around the edge of the house, they'll pick away at those spiders and those other little bugs that are in the corners of your windows and that kind of thing. But they'll leave quite soon. The birds' nests are protected. It's against the law to do anything about it, actually. But please try and leave them alone until the end of the summer. But they'll fledge themselves quite shortly and be gone.
Patience, patience, patience. Now, what about fledgling birds? If we happen to come across some birds that have, they look like they've fallen out of the nest, what do you do? The advice is just to leave them alone, is it? Or try and put them back into the nest?
Yeah, that's it. It's against our instincts, really. We want to do something about them normally. You see them, they're so cute, little tiny balls of feathers, really, at that stage. But leave them alone. They have an amazing ability. If they're a day or 2 before they should be fledging, in other words, before they can fly, but something disturbs them. If we disturb the nest, or if a cat gets up there and disturbs the nest, or something like that, they can tend to kind of burst out, and it's a little strategy that they have. And quite often they can fall quite a big distance from high up in a tree. And because they're so feathery and so fluffy, there's still a lot of their downy feathers, which are the very soft feathers, underneath them. Their flight feathers are only really developing, that they can kind of bounce around quite well and survive those, what to us would be a huge fall. And then they'll chirp, 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 and mum and dad will be very aware of this, and they'll come and they'll feed them, but they'll also guide them. So if you go up near them, they'll go quiet, of course. And quite often they're not the brightest at that stage. They haven't figured out how dangerous we can be or how dangerous the world can be. So they might be standing in the middle of the path or on the edge of the road, and that can be kind of alarming. So if you see them somewhere like that, try and pick them up with a little leaf or something, and whoosh them just so they're underneath cover, and then back away as quickly as you can. And mum or dad will be watching you. They'll be quiet too. But if you back away to a good distance and stay nice and still, after a short while then you'll see mum and dad starting to feed them. And if the area isn't safe, you'll often see and hear mum and dad chirping away, going further and further and further away, deeper into the hedgerow, deeper into the woods, or wherever it is. It's amazing that they'll know where to lead them, and they'll do the best thing.
So resist the temptation to take them home and put them in front of a saucer of milk. Yeah, because mum and dad knows the best diet for them. Unless you've seen the cat go in and kill the parents or something like that, they'll be looked after for the most part. They look after them for about 2 weeks. And they'll chirp, chirp, chirp incessantly, and the parents will keep feeding them as frantically as they can. And after about 2 weeks, for the smaller birds, well, then they're left on their own, and they're big enough and strong enough to start fending for themselves. If you have a cat, or if you have something, you might need to try and put them a little bit higher up in the bush, or try and put them where they're out of way, or better again, just keep your cat inside just for that couple of days until those birds have got strong enough to fly away and go about their own thing. Cats, while we like cats, and they're also very useful for getting rid of mice and rats and things like that, they devastate our birds, and especially our baby birds at this time of year, who just aren't as quick. Is it true that these fledglings, for the most part, will spend a couple of days on the ground, even if their nest isn't under threat? That mums put them on the ground anyhow to help them to develop just before they take off?
Not really. No, different species will do different things. So some of them tend to forage on the ground a bit more anyway, like those sparrows we mentioned earlier, and they get quite used to people quite quickly. So they'll let you get quite close when you're heading out to the car, you're going out to the garden, whatever, before they finally fly off. And they'll be pecking away for all sorts of little seeds and bugs that are too small for us even really to notice or to see at all. But most birds know they stay in cover. And if you listen out, in fact, I've got a couple of little videos on my website, on the Rewild Your Child page on Nature Northwest. And if you go down to the bottom of that page, you'll see 2 videos I took a couple of years ago of blue tits. And they don't have their blue head. They still have a kind of greenish head. They're still very well camouflaged. But you'll hear them cheep, cheep, cheeping. And if you can listen out for that sound, it's a lovely thing. Because if you hear it, you'll start spotting it. The coal tits are out. The great tits are out. A lot of those smaller birds. I saw a robin being fed just last night. Robins also don't look like the parents. They have a speckled front. They don't have the red front or the red breast on them as yet. They'll develop that later in the summer. But you'll hear them calling, and it's a very specific kind of call that it only comes from the chicks at this time of year. You won't hear it at any other time of year. In fact, the call is so persistent. Something that makes me smile about it is blackbirds. They tend to abandon their chicks. They all have to abandon their chicks after time to encourage them to feed themselves. But blackbirds, after maybe 3 weeks or so, and the calls get so persistent and so tough, so loud, and they go on and on, that eventually it drives the mum or dad blackbird away, and the mum or dad blackbird thinks, I can't keep up with this anymore, and just flies off.
Yeah, I hear them.
That's a word of warning to all the young out there.
Yeah. Now, if the little chicks aren't feathered, well, what do you do then? Do you look around for their nest and pop them back in?
Yeah, if they've fallen out and they're not feathered, absolutely. So the nest will be very close by. So if you can try and get them in, don't handle them. If it's possible not to handle them with your bare hands at all, that's much better. To have gloves on or have some kind of way of scooping it up, pop back in. If you can't find that at all, contact your local vet. There's an animal rehab place in Ballyar. You can contact them, or there's another one in Derry. I know that people have been bringing some birds into them recently, but of course these guys they're overstretched as it is, and this isn't really their main kind of work. But it's well worth contacting them.
And it would be important to put them back into their own nest.
If they're at that stage, yeah, but it'd be unusual to see it at that stage. Possibly, it's something that people might have seen over the last few days. That big storm that we had on Friday, there was a few chicks seemed to get blown out, and I got a good few people contacting me actually wondering about that very thing. But usually, if they have enough feathers on, if they look fairly feathered, leave them alone. Remove them off a track if needs be, push them into the side, but otherwise leave them alone. Mum and Dad will sort them out.
Could you ask Angus how I could keep crows from eating all the lamb nuts in a sheep feeder? They're eating more nuts than the lambs. Any suggestions would be gratefully appreciated. So there you are, a problem with the crows eating lamb nuts.
Yeah, it's very difficult. I have chickens or hens myself, and I feed an awful lot more crows than I do hens. It's hard to keep them out of that kind of thing, all right? People use various bangers and those kind of things to keep them away, but they're disturbing kind of things to have to play. So other than that, it's very difficult. And if anybody else actually has any tips out there, because I don't know of any other ways to keep the crows away. See, they're very clever, they're very resourceful, and they also share information with their buddies. When you see the big flocks of crows flying high in the evening time at dusk, it's an amazing sight, and you hear them all calling out. They believe that's communication, telling people about or telling each other about good feeding sites, about dangers, about that kind of thing. So perhaps moving around your feeder might help a bit, but if it's going to be in the same field, the crows are going to find it very quickly.
Someone else has a problem with crows. A question on WhatsApp. It says, I have a crow's nest in a chimney in an old cottage that I'm renovating. When is a good time to remove it?
They will be gone very soon. So keep an eye out on it, and you'll hear the noise of them, and you'll hear the noise of the... it could well be jackdaws that are up there. That's the ones with the kind of greyish head, the slightly smaller crow with the greyish head. And you'll hear they get their name from their call, actually. They make that funny kind of jackdaw sound. And they'll be very vocal, and there'll be a noisy kind of thing that's there. But give it a few weeks if you can. Try and leave that part to the last bit of the renovation if you can at all, because they'll successfully fly off and leave you alone then.
Someone wants to know, is it right to feed wild birds in the summer? Surely they need to learn to fend for themselves.
Yeah, that used to be the belief, all right, that they'll possibly choke on the peanuts if the peanuts might be too big for the chicks, or they'll become dependent on them. But a lot of studies now seem to show that no, that's not the case. They supplement their diet. Most of their diet up until the time they fledge has been bugs, caterpillars and bugs and that kind of thing. So an enormous amount of pest control going on there. And then Mum or Dad will supplement them with little bits of feed from your garden feeders, and the chicks will learn how to get food from there themselves as well. I keep feeding my birds all summer long, and that seems to be a kind of perceived wisdom now. The one thing they say is don't leave out any fat at this time of year. Oh. So in the winter time, making those kind of little bird cakes out of fat, out of salt-free fat, is a wonderful thing to do, and really helps the birds survive through the night. But this time of year, the young chicks, when they're not as experienced feeding, they might get fat on their little young feathers, and that wouldn't be so good. So just keep it simple, keep it to the porridge and the wild bird seed and the peanuts. But absolutely keep feeding them, and then the birds that you feed in your garden will tend to hang around that area, so they'll also act as pest control, and they've shown that in studies. They've shown a direct correlation between the more feeders, the more pest control that those birds do for you.
Caller is aware of people who, instead of feeding the birds, are actually shooting at them. Are there any laws covering the shooting of birds? They aren't farmers, just people who don't want birds near their houses.
Yeah, and it's one of the saddest things, that our disconnect from nature really is kind of amazing. I think it's changing. I think it's changed a huge amount in recent years. I think initiatives like the Green Schools programme, which has been going on for over 20 years now, has really helped with environmental matters. But there's still a lot of people out there who just don't know or don't kind of get it really. Having said that, only yesterday I saw there was an article in the paper. There was some people cutting hedges down the country in Galway, and some local came out and said, we've watched this for 3 years go on, and 3 years in a row go on, where it wasn't necessary, where there wasn't a road safety issue, so they went out and they got it stopped themselves. If you see something like that, people are shooting at it, call the guards. You can't be just letting off shots like that left, right and centre. Or the other thing you can do is call your National Park Ranger. The Conservation Rangers, their role is to protect wildlife specifically, and they will investigate that kind of thing, because it's highly illegal. And our birds are in such trouble. We've noticed in a lot of nature over the last month or two now, over the last couple of months, now that we've been staying at home and looking at our own patch and our weather's been good. However, the numbers of birds in general for an awful lot of our species is considerably less than it was only 30 or 40 years ago. So if you think there's plenty out there now, there used to be an awful lot more, and it's us that has got rid of these things. So absolutely, get on to your guards or get on to the local National Park Ranger.
Someone else says that they have a problem with a sparrow hawk. Could you please ask, is there anything I can do to stop a sparrow hawk attacking the birds at my bird feeder?
Yeah, the sparrow hawks, it's a funny one. It brings up mixed emotions, because it's like so many of these things with nature. There's some bits of nature that we like. And we talked a couple of weeks ago about the cuckoos and the magpies, and how we like cuckoos despite what they do, and we don't like magpies. Despite how clever and curious they can be. So we kind of, from our human emotional point of view, we tend to pick out one thing or another. The sparrow hawk, if you see a sparrow hawk coming, there's a couple of things about it I think that are actually very positive, even though it can look quite brutal. One, it means that there's some great habitats and great nature around you, which is not surprising, because an awful lot of Donegal we have great habitats and great nature. And if a sparrowhawk is able to survive, it means there's a reasonably good, healthy bird population there. But the other thing that the sparrowhawk does is 9 out of 10 attempts, even more actually than 90%, a little bit more than 90% of its attempts to hunt are unsuccessful, because the birds are so tuned into it. So if a sparrowhawk is taking birds, it's probably taking the ones that are a little bit slower, a little bit weaker, and the ones that perhaps wouldn't have survived the winter anyway, and won't go on to breed and won't spread their gene pool in that kind of way. What you can do if you want it, quite often sparrowhawks will use the hedges as cover. And they might even sit in the hedge for quite a while, and you won't even notice them, because they're amazingly camouflaged once they stay still, and they've got great patience, and then they'll burst out when the time is right. So you could move the feeders a little bit away from the hedge, but don't move them too far, because the small birds, they want those hedges as cover for themselves as well.
Okay. Final one on birds. Caller has some house martins who for 2 years have tried to build a nest in the corner of her gable end. Both times they had what looked like a fine nest built, but then it fell down. She doesn't want them to stop coming, but isn't sure what can be done.
You can get house martin nests on the likes of the Birdwatch Ireland's website. So have a look on there. They have an excellent website with a shop where you can buy things online. Or there's another fantastic website called nhbs.com, if people remember that, nhbs.com. And they're ecology suppliers. They'll sell you everything from bat detectors to pond dipping nets to tortoise to nests for the house martins. And they'll sell you nests that you can attach up onto the house, which people often do, and they can be very successful.
Brilliant. It's amazing what is available if you go looking. Now, let's move on from birds and chat about stoats. And stoats, I suppose, they look like a bit like a weasel or a mink. Is that right?
A little bit, yeah. The Irish stoat is an amazing thing. We've a subspecies, so there's stoats all over Europe, but we've our own specific Irish subspecies, which is unique to both Ireland and the Isle of Man, actually, but nowhere else. And people often call them weasels, but in Britain, mainland Britain, they have weasels and they have stoats, but in Ireland we just have stoats. We don't have weasels. Weasels are even smaller again. Right. Stoats the males are around about 30 centimetres long, and the females are smaller. And they're a beautiful little creature. They do a great service for us. They're more common than people know and people think, because they're really good at using cover and hiding, and they're out there probably fairly near you as we speak.
And the long, thin bodies and small feet, short feet.
Yeah, they do. So the two things that they could possibly be mixed up with here are the mink, which is all black. And it's much bigger and chunkier, and the pine marten, which is browner, more pointy ears, and has that kind of white patch in its throat, whereas the stoat really is very small, very slinky, very sleek, short little legs, and it's kind of chestnutty brown on top, has a white belly and a white throat. And that's the thing, if it's all white underneath and all brown on top, you've seen a stoat. And remember the small size as well. The other thing is it has a little black tip on the tail, and that's the real giveaway. That's the best giveaway. You don't see them out in cover or out from cover too often, but if you do, one of the things you'll see as they run, they tend to run a kind of irregular little line, loping up and down, and they wave that little tail around the place, and they think that black tip on the end of the tail is to keep predators away, to distract predators. As the likes of a buzzard would think they were just delicious if they saw one scooting by. So that's the way to kind of tell them apart from the mink and the pine marten.
And where I normally associate stoats with old stone walls, but they live obviously in other places, but I presume that they like a lot of cover.
Yeah, they do. So the stone walls are fantastic for them, and our old stone walls along the west coast and whatnot, and they'll happily live in there. You'll find them often on coastal places, and it's believed that that was probably their original habitat. But now they're right inland as well, and they'll use old ditches and things like that. They'll often nest in the likes of, say, a rabbit's burrow or a rat's burrow or places like that, animals that they've killed themselves, and then they'll take that nest. But they're very elusive. They're afraid of us. Usually, most people, the only time they see them is a chance sighting of one of them scooting across the road. Right there.
They mostly come out at night, but at the moment, during the summer, it would be the best time to see them during the day. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. And the day is just so long at the moment. It really is. Yeah. It's bright till nearly 11 o'clock, and I think it's quite a magical time of year. And this time, April and May are fantastic when everything is waking up, and all of that. And that greenery is coming back to life, and all of the chicks and the birds are singing and the rest, and things can tend to quieten down a little bit in June, but there's so much activity out there. There's so many baby birds around, there's so many other baby stoats and other characters all needing to be fed, and the day is really, really long. It's bright from after 4 in the morning until nearly 11 o'clock at night. So you have a better chance of seeing them in the evening time, because their cover of darkness has got shorter and shorter. And I really think an awful lot of Irish nature is very small. But if you get into the idea of looking at smaller things and looking at the beauty and the wonder of those smaller things, our nature is as fascinating as anywhere in the world. And if you think of tigers, the huge predators that they are, and the incredible size of beasts that they can hunt and kill and carry, stoats, I think, are like our own little kind of tigers, because they can kill up to 5 times their own weight. So for such a tiny little creature, they can haul a rabbit that'll be many times its weight and size, and they can haul it up over a stone wall, up across a field or a ditch, into wherever it wants to stash it.
So is it true to say that they would control the rabbit population then?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, they will, or they will certainly do their best. And rats and mice and anything that's kind of smallish like that. The shrews, they'll take birds, bugs and things like that too. But they're really carnivorous. They think, because stoats across the continent would eat berries in autumn time as well, but that just hasn't been proven here. But they think that probably happens here too. But really, it's animals that they're after. And if you look up on YouTube, and you just put into YouTube stoats and dance, and they do this amazing kind of dance. They're flexible, weaving little body, and it dances back and forth like a little hypnotic kind of charm. And the poor old rabbit, that's not the brightest creature in the world, it will get locked in with this. and the stoat will get closer and closer and closer as it's weaving and doing its little dance, and the rabbit won't know what to do, and then it's too late for it. It's an amazing thing to see.
Gets mesmerised by the dancing. Is that how it works?
Completely mesmerised, yeah.
What about if they hunt for rabbits? What about the chickens? And they would take chickens if they got a chance as well?
Not really. That would be more likely the likes of the mink, or the foxes, of course, as well. Will try and take chickens if there's an easy meal there. The stoats, the chicken is just a little bit too big, and also it's a bit too human. They're a bit. They're not quite as brave as some of those other characters to come into our own world, our own domain. You know. Right. So you don't really hear of a problem that way.
Is it true that they have really big territories, and within that territory that they'll have a number of different dens where they sort of go and hang out and get a wee nap if they're far away from home?
Reasonable territory. They won't cover a huge amount of distance, but they will have a few different nests, absolutely, yeah. And they will quite often move their little pups from one place to another after a few days if they sense any danger at all, or just to kind of be smart and be clever about it, and they'll carry their pup one by one, which is a very hazardous thing for them to have to do, but into one of their little borrowed burrows that they've taken off the poor unsuspecting rabbit or the rat or whatever it was there in the first place.
Well, I can't believe that we're almost out of time, but just before you go, I want to mention something that was announced in Dublin this week, and this is where Kilcha, they own and manage about half of the forests in the Dublin mountains. And of course, Dublin was a much smaller city when the trees were first planted, but they've announced anyhow that the forests are going to be, up to now they've been managed for commercial purposes, but they are going to be developed into recreational areas. And is this a model that we might see Quilcha adapting elsewhere in the country?
I would certainly hope so, and they've announced it with great fanfare, and rightly so, because what they're doing, I think, is fantastic news. They're going to try and have what they call continuous cover, and continuous cover, if you think about it, if you're a squirrel or a stoat or whatever it is, but especially something like a squirrel that is living in one part of the forest, and then suddenly the middle of the forest is chopped down for whatever commercial reasons, and nothing is left. Well, then how are you going to get over to your old breeding or your old hunting grounds kind of thing, foraging grounds? So they want to leave cover that will be there the whole time where it's appropriate. They've talked about also taking out some of the Sitka spruce, which is one of those big plantations that doesn't support much nature, a non-native tree, and slowly but surely replacing it with more native things. So what they're looking at doing in those 9 sites in Dublin is fantastic. We have Ards Forest Park up here, which is Quilcha owned and managed, and it's also a fantastic place for biodiversity. Despite the fact that a lot of the woodlands in there will be non-native species, there's also a lot of native species as well. But there is problems with invasive species in there. There's an awful lot of rhododendron ponticum. And it'd be great to see these kind of plans rolled out more in the likes of Ards and in some of the other places that are all over rural Ireland, because we've an awful lot of Quilcha property, and the more of that is handled sustainably and handled for biodiversity, the better for all of us.
All right. Well, NatureNorthWest.ie is your website if anybody wants any more information, or hopefully you'll be back with us next Tuesday. In the meantime, Angus Kennedy.
Yeah. And if I could just mention that we're doing a hedgerow talk with the Eco Carn project, which is a fantastic project that's going on in Carndonagh. Yes. There's a hedgerow talk. It's free for everybody, but they'll have to register on Eventbrite. I have it on the event page of my website, or you'll find Eco Carn, 2 words, on Facebook. And there'll be 11 o'clock on Friday, but you need to register by Thursday for that.
Brilliant. Thanks, Angus.
Thanks very much, John.